Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. This is Double Bits Workshop. So in today's episode, we'll be taking some of the larger or wider pieces of pallet wood and making some Catan board pieces. So for those of you who are not quite familiar with it, it is a popular board game called Settlers of Catan. And I enjoy it quite a bit, and I've seen quite a lot of other people enjoy it as well. And I've always had a curiosity to make the little hexagon pieces out of pallet wood, because not only is it renewable, but it's also pretty close in size. So originally I was going to use the normal boards that I use for pretty much most of my projects, but sadly they were just a little too shy of the size. So from side to side of the actual piece, or diameter of it, is going to be 3.5 inches. So the radius of it from the dead center to the side is a good old 1.75 or 1 3/4 inch from that side to there, from the center to the side. So I have gone through and kind of played around with it a little bit. We're going to be using the good old CNC to cut these pieces out. I have cut a, what is it called, a little bit of a sacrificial board for the bottom, so that way when you cut through the board into that one, you're not doing any damage to the unit. But we'll get to that here in a second. This is probably going to be a 2 at the very earliest. Otherwise, this will probably be a 3 or 4 part series I'm going to kind of start in on. And for right now, we're going to be trying to plane down these pieces that I found here in the shop. And then we're going to be taking those pieces, mounting them to the sacrificial board, and then cutting out the hexagon pieces to begin with. I will also need to be cutting out the trim or outside of the parameter of the board. So those will also need to be cut next. That's going to be a little bit more into the software, trying to figure out the shapes and designs, and just trying to get everything to match up properly. So we're going to try to play around with that and see what we can come up with. So stick around, hopefully you enjoy, and let's start in on this little adventure and see what comes of it. Alright, so now we are in the garage here, and I've got my CNC set up. I actually have put onto it a piece of sacrificial board, so that way when I make my cuts through, I'm not actually damaging anything below and going into my unit whatsoever, or even chancing it. So the boards that I have been planing out in the wood shop are pretty darn thin. So I ended up actually getting these boards down to 5/16 for thickness. That was just kind of a rough estimate. Some of the wood was a little bit more rough, and some of it was a little thicker, some of it was a little thinner, so I tried to just kind of level everything out and get this reasonably thin without getting it ultra thin, so that way these are going to be durable, nice larger pieces. I didn't want to go like full inch or half-inch piece of material, because it would also be a lot harder on my end mill and on my CNC in general. Just testing the waters here, not really going too crazy with it. Don't want to do too much damage at all right off the bat. We'll get a few cuts in, see what we can do, then I might start testing the limits a little bit. So on these pieces of wood, their total width currently is 4 3/4 on average. I have a couple different varying sizes. These are all different remnants and stuff that I had kind of lying around in my wood shop. I found a few more boards at the end and got them all planed up nice. So you might have also noticed in the prior footage, I had been going and struggling through it, kind of like guiding and pushing a little bit of the wood, and it sounded a little bit off. So I turned the machine off, and lo and behold, I have been running my machine absolutely to the wall, and the blades were dull as can be, so I had to flip them around. And then after that, it was just buttery smooth, back to absolute like I just bought the unit yet again. So make sure to always swap your blades out and check them regularly. If your unit starts to act a little odd for a planer, just make sure to do a little bit of routine maintenance. I was getting in a hurry and didn't take the time to actually look it over and see that sadly, yes, I did need to swap the blades around and will eventually need to replace them down the road. For right now, this should give me another, who knows, 4 or 5 months at least, depending on how much material I'm planing through it and if any of it has any defects or issues along the way. So, done that side note. Now, what I've also done with my CNC is I have properly mounted everything down. Now, it came with 4 of these little hold down brackets, but what I'm going to do with my material is slide it up the middle, get it to where I need it to, and then I have very small screws. I'm going to lightly drill and screw them into the same sacrificial board, so that way it mounts nice and solid. I know that this won't wiggle around, and I'm not trying to figure out yet again another little like apparatus. I do plan on either purchasing or making some additional standoff holds that only require 1 screw and work on kind of a levering system. So that way they just lever over depending on how much I twist down on some kind of like wing nuts, or a few different setups kind of come to mind. And I should have most, if not all, the material to make them. I'll look through what I've got. If not, they aren't too expensive. 2 hold downs for 20 bucks is not terrible, but it isn't ideal. I'd like to make them if I can. If for some reason they don't really want to interact with my machine, or I don't have them, I'm going to see and kind of look around and test the waters a little more. Those are just the first ones I saw on Amazon. Kind of glanced at them, but seems a little too much for the moment. Rather save that money for end mills and things that I might break down the road. Hoping not to, but planning just in case. Alright, so I'm going to mount the material down, and what we're going to try to make are these little guys. So they're ultra thin, still sturdy, nice little game board pieces. This is what they pop out of in the actual game tiles. So that pops out, gives you your playing pieces. There are 19 of these, so that's how many I plan on making, and I have measured it from end to end is 3.5 inches. From the center out to the end of the radius is 1.75 if you want to go off of a decimal, otherwise it is 1 3/4 inches. So that is what we're working with for dimensioning. I'm turning it onto its side. I could go either way. I'm going to kind of feel it out on a piece of wood. Otherwise, I have been playing around with Carbide Create, or Carbide 3D's Create program, since it is free software. You can purchase the Pro Edition. I have glanced at it, and depending on how well this little guy runs, and if it can end up being profitable, I might look at purchasing that down the road. But for right now, I'm just looking at the material cost of what I can do to get the best out of this machine, and working with the free software, which is just fine. So I'm using this as a CAM program. So I'm making all of my designs and everything in this, and then I'm exporting the G code, and then I am using Candle for the GRBL coding to actually execute through the machine to do what I had originally set up in this. It's very intuitive, very just drag and drop, play around with some dimensions. You go through, choose your bits on the actual interface here, creating tool paths for what you got that you're coming up with, and then you just click show simulation to see that it is all in order and each of your pieces line up, and then you can see that your pathing works out. So it's pretty straightforward. I can talk on that one a little bit later. I'm going to play around with some software down the road, see if I can actually capture what we're looking at, so that way you don't have to deal with the rainbow lines of me trying to record with that camera, this screen. But bear with me. I have 3 hexagons lined up, dimensioned off of this same piece, and I'm going to try to cut them in a line if the line is appropriate. Otherwise, on some boards like this, which have a notch that busted through, I'm probably going to do one at a time. So I have 2 different files, one for an individual, and then one for 3 on it. And I figured 3 is the maximum that this machine can get just off of its distancing. So it is 16 from the front to the back, but you kind of give up an inch just for the actual machine to properly hit that area. So I just still always work off of 15 inches from front to back of the machine. And you do have 9 inches from side to side, but you still need something to hold the material down. So if you mount in via bolts or something, a sacrificial board, and then just screw it to that board, you can maximize and utilize the full 9 inches almost perfectly. But you still have to give up just a little bit unless you're willing to risk damaging some of the sides, what have you. So for the unit, that's a couple just a little, in case you're wondering, type notes. So work off of the basis of a safety of around 7 inches for your width, and then plan for a maximum of around 15 inches front to back for whatever you'll be able to cut. I still give myself nice parameters and leeway, kind of a safety zone, just because of these brackets. I really don't want to see that end mill touch these steel brackets, because I don't want to destroy any bits of my spindle or anything of my drill bit. None of that. We will now go through the process of screwing that down, and I'm going to run a pass through and see how it ends up working out. Alright, so no major damage or anything, but I didn't double check my depth. I left it at 1/2 inch, so this is of course 5/16, so this is under 1/2 inch. So it was going into my board underneath, which isn't a problem, but I'd like to get the dimension a little closer because I ended up having an issue happen. I wasn't able to catch it in time, but as this was going through, it cut through the material completely, and it was starting to go into the sacrificial board. And then right here, it gripped for just a second, and through this, it didn't go far, it was just back there, and it broke this little piece of wood right here off. But it could have been way worse. So, and also I was worried it would actually grab and damage this board, which doesn't look like it did. So now, here's the first little hexagon. Super stoked. And I will be going through the edges here and sanding those down nice and smooth, so that way this is a good, nice plate tile. And I think I'm just going to laser engrave on this. I originally contemplated about going a little bit further, cutting the circle in so that way you knew what roll this was, if this was going to be this versus that type deal. And I might still do that down the road, but at least right now I wanted to get the tiles done and maybe laser engrave, and on version 2 I'll actually create the inlays. And that'll be for a different set of coating, so that way I can get everything lined up nicely. And yeah, so I'm going to go through cutting the next couple pieces. Originally it said 19 minutes for the time, but it's looking like it'll actually be closer to around 10 minutes per piece. So that'll be about roughly 190 minutes in total for all 19 pieces for at least the original tiles to get to this point. And if I can kind of streamline it a little bit, maybe up and play with my speeds a little bit more, the cuts seem pretty good. Definitely could use some sanding in some spots depending on the orientation. It looks like going across is just fine. These sides were good, but these sides didn't get cut too well on there, oddly enough. So on to the next 18 pieces. So, that was exciting. The last few lines, it did take a while. It was about an hour and 8 minutes to do the entire pathing on that piece there. I had a misfortune, sadly, for a split second, just with where everything lined up, and these little switches on here triggered on the back path because I had my workspace too far back. That's what I was talking about earlier with how everything's set up to where there's limiter switches in the back and you can't fully go to the back of your actual platform. So I ended up having about, what was that? Before it stopped, it was right at the end, so roughly 5 inches is cut from your table from where your end mill sets, sadly. So you lose 5 inches off of the total 16-inch platform, so you have 11 working inches for your CNC and or laser engraver on the front of this unit. Now, that's something that's a little bit disheartening. I would like to have had the ability to utilize the entire gantry spacing and everything, but it doesn't quite work out that well. And that's just mainly the footprint tries to be the same height and same width of everything so it can move around and you don't have to have so much on the backside overhang. I would have not minded having that, kind of giving that up so that way I could have more of a flush mount, but it is what it is. Learning, working with it. So something just to keep in mind, that you have 7 inches by 11 inches of actual working area, and you can sometimes squeeze out an extra inch here or there, or have your actual table kind of extend ever so slightly past where you have it set up in the front. Now, putting that aside, I am very excited with the end result. What I had to do in the software for Carbide Create is I created one of these little guys, cut it out, made sure my spacing was all right, and then in order to get this approximately the way I wanted it to, I then created 3 of these and mounted all 3 of them up to each other perfectly. So that way I ended up just kind of guesstimating a line and then running each of these lines by moving it back and forth, creating these distances, making this the same size as up here, extending it out, playing around pixel by pixel or a little square box by square box, dragging around each of the individual nodes until I created this piece. So as you can see, it is almost a carbon copy. Even if these hooks are not the same size, I don't care. As long as, yes, that matches up with little to no overhang. Now this is the issue that I had. So when I hit that limiter switch in the back, it paused everything. It killed it, thinking that it was going to start going into the danger zone and cause damage to the unit, which I'd prefer. But what that meant for me is I had to try to eyeball and line up the starting point where I approximately thought it was. It was all good, except on here, this is what you'll see, ever so slightly off the path. So my first drag through the remainder of it. Now I don't like sand, and this is a learning process, so I just had to bring my material down a little bit lower, and now I have something for spacing. There's a couple knots in the wood too that kind of fell out, but it's going to be character. It's, reclaimed material that is polished up very nicely, and if I really care to, I can just flip it over, because that side looks awesome. I'm really excited for this, being as the item that I ended up actually creating pretty much from scratch. I had dimensions to go off of, but none of these are templates off of Instructables or anything else like that. There is a guy in Instructables that made one of these. That's why I referenced it. But I didn't use any of his presets or anything like that, but I am happy with these end results. I did have one board that had a hairline crack that kind of went through, so you can see it here, sadly. I just have to do a little glue job on that, pinch it together, and it'll be just fine. So for my overall, with the pathing and everything, running the bit not super hard so I don't end up killing it, and all the feed rates and everything kind of calculated. So whatever your feed rate is that you feel comfortable with, you just go 50% less of that for your plunge rate. And that's when the bit actually plunges into the material and goes back up. Your feed rate is when it drags across the material to follow the outline. And then it lifts itself up and goes through it again. Your lift is 50% less, so that way it has time for your bit to go up. It's still spinning at max speed that you set it to, so it's cooling itself down just being outside of the material. And then it goes over to the next pathway and kind of goes through it again. And then that's kind of how that works for plunge rate, and it'll also have spacing and time that you can actually set in there too if you feel your bits are getting too hot for the material that you're working with. This is just basic wood. Some of it's hard, some of it's soft wood. That's kind of the love-hate relationship with pallet wood. So, hour and 8 minutes off of this. Now that I have all the time put into just being able to plug that SVG or that file, essentially that G code, into the unit and just hit go. These little guys are about 12 minutes a piece. I might be able to knock that down to around 10 minutes. So overall, for 3 of these and 1 of these guys, we're looking at, for setup time, move around, I'm approximating an hour and 45 minutes. Now I need to do this whole setup 5 more times. So 6 in total. 6 pieces of these will give me my perimeter for the base game. And then doing 3 of these per one of those means that I'll have 1 extra that I'll need to do at the very tail end of this. So I'm hoping roughly around 12-ish hours. It'll probably be longer than that for getting at least a rough idea to know if I need to revamp this at all. I mean, it matches pretty well, but we'll see once I get the second one in. And then the third one will give me like full-on design ideas. And then right around the end will I know exactly where I'm sitting or if I have to redo this. So there is that kind of concern. But even just getting 1 more will give me the idea if I need to refine anything before continuing on with the rest. So it could be a 20-hour endeavor in total, if not a little bit longer. We shall see. And I'm enjoying it so far. Hopefully you guys are as well. So this will be the end of part 1. Part 2, I'm going to see if I can continue just cranking these out. We'll just kind of jump right into it with some time lapses, and we'll kind of go from there. If I find anything out, I'll let you know along the way. And hopefully it can either round up in part 2, if not part 3. So thank you all so very much. If you enjoyed the video, if you enjoyed the content, if you like seeing CNC stuff through the channel, let me know in the comments down below. Let me know exactly what you're thinking of my setup, how things are rolling. This is still kind of a work in progress. As I get a few more things down, I just want to get projects going through this. I will refine and kind of make this a better backdrop so that way it's not just so bland looking at the moment for you. And for myself too. But hopefully more fun projects and things I'll be just putting on the back wall, so each of those little accomplishments that I enjoy and like having will just go on the back wall for decoration as well. Thanks again. Hopefully you enjoyed. Make sure to hit the subscribe button. It helps out greatly. If you want to get notifications, make sure to hit that notification bell each and every time a video comes out. You'll get a notification for it. So thank you all so very much, and have yourself a wonderful evening.